Today I will share with you a fresh setup in the Exchange Queen's Gambit Declined for Black, which has very little theory attached to it, yet leads to some quite fresh positions with some good chance to play for the win. Now, before I show this system, which I picked up from game between Robson and Caruana in 2024 US Championship, I think the system that originally inspired this idea was the one where if white plays Queen C2, which nowadays isn't seen as often as the move E3 and allowing the short system and so forth. Let's say they play Queen C2 to avoid the whole Bishop F5 idea. Well, then this up with H6 and now Bishop E6 is thought to have a very good reputation for black. We get this very flexible setup where we don't really block the bishop with the knight. And one key thing here is that with the move Bishop E6, when it doesn't work so well, it's usually because I have ideas like Knight G2 and Knight F4 to kind of go after our bishop. But when we still have this move of G5 available to hit the bishop back and take away that F4 square, then that doesn't become so much of a problem. And in fact, after Bishop D3, G5, we kind of see the black's idea now. He's basically playing almost like in a Rogozin kind of style, or semi-Slav kind of style, where he's just going to take the bishop, claim the bishop pair, and just have a very solid position with the center in quite a good development. And in fact, if white were to play the move of Knight G2, this is actually going to transpose back into the main line of our system. Also, another move what I know some grandmasters like Santosh Latasa and Moroni going for was after e3 playing this h6 and then doing it this way with bishop e6 and going for this kind of setup. But I consider this move order a little bit less precise than the Caruana move order. And one of the reasons for that is that the move of f3 kind of allows white to play the Botvinnik Kasparov type setup where you play for the e4 break, but it also neutralizes the move of g5 when after bishop to f2, or even bishop g3 for that matter, that we kind of see that we're not really succeeding in getting rid of their bishop, so the knight ends up a bit offside on h5, and it's not so clear what our compensation is for weakening the king side. So that's why the system I'm going to propose to you is going to be the move of bishop e6, which is a lot less theoretical than the main line of c6, or even some moves like bishop e7 or the Rogozin style bishop b4, which I've also played in the past. But bishop e6, yeah, a bit more of a fresh idea. After e3, knight bd7, we again create this setup where we're not worried about the move knight d5 anymore. And after bishop d3, c6 is where we have a bit of a crossroads, a bit of a choice in terms of what white can play here. I did pick out quite a lot of games, but since I mentioned the Robson Caruana game first, let's start with that. And if you are wondering, why is it that Robson played this retreat of bishop f4, which seems maybe a little bit voluntary here. The point is that if you were to play a move like knight f3, I mean, we already kind of looked at moves like queen c2 and this sort of thing just beforehand, and it's true there will often be a lot of transitions to other lines where white plays queen c2 later, but say they play knight f3 and just develop naturally, then the point of black's play, to be fair, you can also play bishop d6 and kind of play it like an a6 QGD without the move a6 played, so that's also a way to get an improved version of the position, but the one most in spirit with our approach, though, is to go h6 and just to harass the bishop. And then in this case, we are going to grab the bishop pair, and that will give us a fairly healthy position. Just to show you an example, there was a game between Papas Simakopoulos against Santosh Latasa. That went queen c2, and yeah, you generally do want to take that bishop relatively quickly, which is what he did in the game. But the move queen to f6, computer will say you could also put the queen on e7, or just play bishop to e7, g7, and just castle short, because I can't really easily get at your king. So that would also be possible, but queen f6 is a little bit more ambitious, where we have long castling and white, planning to go for the attack on white's king with a pawn storm. In turn, white's best bet here is probably to go a4 and try to also start an attack on our king. That being said, after a5, if we do play a move such as a6, well, one might ask the question of how white's going to break through. But white does have some ideas with b4, where either you take the pawn and you run to a big attack, or they can go b5 and just like sack a piece anyway to attack. So yeah, it's not quite that simple. Like white does have ways through, which is probably the reason why you might prefer to play rook c8 and just keep things a bit more closed. Yeah, the pawn is a little bit annoying for us, but I think objectively we do have reasonable counterplay on the other flank, and managed to stabilize the king for the moment. But instead, white played e4. By the way, I'm not going to go through the full games, just kind of enough just to show you how the position typically plays out. So white does go b4, which is a good move here, saying that we just want the open lines for the attack. But instead, yeah, instead of the move of g4, which actually after white's move of b5, in fact, black probably should just be losing here because king is kind of coming under a decisive attack, and the fact that black one is more due to him being a stronger player than anything to do with this position. So after b4, yeah, black really should just play the move king b8. And then if b5, rook c8, and that would be the correct way to defend the king and allow you to sort of get back to your own attack in due course. But anyway, that was the first example I want to share. And like I said, I'd probably play a move like queen e7 or bishop g7 and castle short. Because we saw when we castle long, we are running into a bit of an attack, so it is a little bit more risky. And I think practically a lot harder for black to defend in comparison to just playing it solid, casting on the same side as the opponent, whatever that may be. As it happens, yeah, there are also, of course, some other ways they can play. I mentioned a move bishop f4, which Robson played against Caruana, and now I think we can sort of understand a little bit why this bishop f4 move was played, because it does mean that now white is able to keep his bishop alive and keep it on this nice diagonal. At the same time, they have also spent a lot of time moving the bishop around, which kind of gives us the time to get things rolling for us. And after castle is just a little bit of a test of your existing understanding of the exchange queen's gambit declined. Maybe you guys put in the comments below what would be the move that you would play as black, and then you can compare it to the move that Caruana actually played in the game. But yeah, if you've studied the exchange queen's gambit decline at all from black's point of view, I would expect that you would see this move very quickly. Also, by the way, if you want to play a move like a5 and anticipate minority attack, that would also be perfectly fine, but you're probably going to play this next move on the next turn anyway. And that is the move of knight g7. And the idea of knight g7 is, well, basically, if we look at the bishops, white's bishop here on d3 is nicely complementing the dark squared center, but our light squared bishop is a little bit stuck behind the pawns. So we're just preparing to play bishop f5 and just swap off that bishop. Now, you might be wondering, well, why aren't we stopping a move like b4 with a5 at this point? Well, the reason is that there are other ways to deal with this b4 move, and one of the ways we see in the game is black just goes a6 with the idea that if white were to play a4, then we can then play b5 and just sort of try to bring the knight to the c4 square. And I think it's still the move that white should have played, saying if you go a5 and just take away that option going to c4, I do think white does have some pressure on c6 and thus some chances for an advantage still. Which is maybe why I would have preferred a move of b5 instead, just going for it directly. Now, you might be wondering, well, Max, what's the difference if we just go a4 and, don't we have to play a6 anyway? But it turns out we have this extra option of the move of a5, which is a good resource to remember if you're intending to play this stuff as black. Also, if you are enjoying the video, do make sure to leave a like and also do subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Now, in this case, yeah, white's really struggling to keep things together. Say if they played b8-5, it showed how the knight comes under attack and things fall apart a little for white here. But if you play a takes b5 instead, then there's this a takes b4 intermezzo. And in the arising position after the captures and captures, yeah, in this case, black just has a nice pass pawn on the c file that just gives him a very good game here. So from this point, after a6, like white played knight a4, and maybe you could argue that some parts of this game are not necessarily the most relevant, in that white probably does have, some small chance for an advantage in a position like this. But I'll show you a few more moves just again to see how it plays out after e4, because e4 is a move that white will often play in these different positions, trying to open things up and get at the weakness on c6. But I just think e4 is not all that effective here. After bishop e4, after exchanges, we see that the knights get kicked back, and now after the move of a5, white is now sort of seeing that the b4 pawn is a little bit of a weakness at this point. In fact, a better option for white might even be just to play moves such as ba5 and just liquidate the weakness as soon as possible. Something like this may still allow white perhaps to at least come close to maintaining a balance just by trying to swap things down. But instead after a3, the problem with this is that now the b4 pawn is a significant weakness, which Caruana latched onto with the move knight d5. And yeah, from this point, it was kind of a bit rough for white. Note, by the way, you don't have the knight c3 fork because of the queen b3 counter fork, but you could play moves such as rook a3 to prepare it. That would have been a really nice move. But Caruana's choice to complete the development is also not bad here. And after queen c2, rook a3, rook fc1, yeah, I really like the move that Caruana played. Okay, it turns out there is a fun exchange sack that's also very good for black. We just get this monstrous attack on their king, but Caruana played it the more human way with queen f5, just realizing that the more the pieces get traded, the more these weaknesses are going to come into play. Rook b3, yeah, a little bit of a desperate attempt trying to get some counterplay with like d5 and try to sacrifice two pawns, but at least get the pieces active in a sense. This is a trick that White was playing for, but after the move of rook ea8, very nice move by Caruana, it just keeps the control and doesn't let White get through after g4. And g4 is already a bit desperate, but if you do nothing, Black is going to be able to eventually take that pawn under better circumstances. So g4 was played, but take, rook c5, rook f3, and now a very nice finishing move of rook to c3, just defending the pawn and making it that after takes, that the knight is completely dominating the bishop. Finally, after a few more moves with white basically losing his pawns and black just collecting the harvest, well now we're even forking the rook and the bishop. Although to be fair, white's kind of already lost at this point due to the mate threat. But yeah, at this point, white just resigned. So that was kind of the inspirational game I want to share. First of all, showing that even if they do avoid our whole sort of plan of h6, g5, knight h5, that our position is still going to be quite reasonable. Another example of this was a game between Alberto David against Max Warmerdam, where f3, yeah, does mean, like I said before, that h6, g5 is no longer so effective. We've also kept our cards a little bit close to our chest in this version by not playing the move h6. There's kind of a lot of subtleties in the QG of when h6 is good, when it's not so good. And here it's a case where against the f3 set, we kind of don't want to play h6, because now the difference is we can play this move of knight to h5, and they don't have the move of bishop f2 to keep their bishop alive, meaning that we kind of get to recycle the pieces a little bit. Now, in the sake of transparency, I will admit that this position is probably slightly better for white with perfect play, that, if they do play, say, h4, they can try to go for an attack on our king if we castle short, so we are going to castle long. But yeah, it turns out you can play a4, like very Alpha Zero style, and white probably does have a small advantage in a position like this one, in all fairness, with something like this maybe being a typical sequence. Now it's definitely still quite solid and playable from Black's point of view, but yeah, White does get a little bit of pressure if they play perfectly. That's a very common situation with these Black shortcuts that they're not so much worse than the main lines. But if the opponent finds all the right moves, yeah, normally they will get something to work with. But given that your opponent is very unlikely to be ready for bishop e6, and given the position is still quite solid and reliable, I think it's a pretty good trade-off for the vast majority of players. So yeah, after the move knight g3 instead in the game, I think knight g3 is just a strategic mistake, because even if, let's say, you play a move such as g6, the knight just ends up being very stuck. That's kind of why I was putting knight on f4 instead in the line I was showing before, because then at least you have a little bit more of a target to kind of work with. But after knight g3, castles is obviously perfectly good as well, and we see after a few moves that g6 is indeed played. And ideally, you'll often have these decisions to go h5 and kind of use that weakening against white. King b1, knight b6, just a nice move, just, anticipating any later b4, b5 shenanigans. Also stops the knight coming to c5, which is an idea there's been played in games such as Kasparov Anderson from back in the day. But after h3, yeah, black goes h5, and just a position already is more pleasant for black to play. And probably white's best bet is not to try to keep the tension, but just to secure the space and try to stabilize in this sort of way. Maybe even going e4 at some point to get some play. But I think what happened in this game is that white was maybe a little bit too patient, and what kind of happened is that black's position just kind of got better with time. Also, by the way, move knight h7 would have been very nice, but not the easiest move to find in a rapid game, of course. But still, the way that black played is also definitely more pleasant. We're just using the kind of overextension of white's position against him. And rather than, say, playing something like bishop f1 and, just shuffling back and forth, trying not to make things any worse, instead white plays e4, which is just a little bit too ambitious, I think. In the rising position, yeah, we kind of see that. Okay, white does manage to get in the move d5. It is true that black probably didn't play it in absolutely the most precise way. But even here, black is still pressing, and in the end, even though from a computer point of view, this position should still be holding white with a piece activity. In the end, black was able to make something of the extra pawn and convert his advantage into a win. But yeah, this is kind of the main part of the game I want to show. Obviously, the video would be a bit long if I went through every single game in full, so we're going to kind of just pick out the key moments. A more creative approach is a move like f4, which was played in Antoine Cruz against Caruana in the Tile Tuesday 2022. And this can actually be very annoying if white does manage to get the Pillsbury up with knight f3, e5. But Serrano cut across that with a move of g5 here. And yeah, if they take, which is what happened in the game, actually a move of knight g4 by Serrano is not so great, because after knight f3, there's this risk that your knight's going to kind of end up getting trapped in some lines. Also, knight e3, it kind of just gives white just a monstrous attack with like g6 and stuff. But instead of knight g4, you can just play the move knight e4 instead. That's kind of the key move to remember. And yeah, you are sacrificing material, but after takes an hg5, it kind of works out for you. After say bishop g3 takes, if they take on e4, it's actually a bit of a mistake because of bishop d5, and you actually end up kind of getting this pawn or getting the knight. So it's actually really bad from white's point of view. Like queen c2, bishop b4, and you just get this very, very strong attack for the pawn in this case. Already it's not very hard for white to sort of stabilize the position fully. A little bit of a computerish idea, but this is one that if you are like a very strong player, you're going to want to remember this idea. And also with bishop d5, yeah, also turns out that this position is actually going to be quite decent for black as well, where you just sort of, make it that their king is going to be stuck in the center, and that's going to give you the kind of long-term compensation that you're sort of looking for here. In any case, that's sort of what I want to share with this game. But what if they play h3 and kind of go for a modified version of the Robson plan? In this case, probably the move of bishop e7 is objectively going to be the best one here. Just going for something like knight h5 and kind of transposing into sort of normal sort of territory for the QGD. Like if the bishop was on c8, then yeah, it would be just, and knight was on b6, that'd be a very standard theoretical position, and certainly transpositions are possible. But you could also try to do without the move knight b6 and argue kind of a slightly improved version of a normal line here. But in the game between Lupulescu against Grachev decided to play a little bit creatively with bishop d6, which, yeah, I mean, objectively is probably not the best line because it is true 92 is sort of annoying. But if you want to just completely avoid theory at any price, then this is one way to do so. Accept you're slightly worse, but the game goes on. In the actual game after h6, the other reason why I don't like bishop d6 as much as bishop b7 is that this exchange of bishops is, I just think, very nice for white. And even though black went on to win this game, with being a blitz game, I do think that, white is just slightly better. And, say if you play f3 and go for the e4 break at a good moment, I just don't really see black's counterplay. Like a lot of times in these positions, you're meant to go b5, b4, and then c5, but it's just nowhere near as effective without the dark spread bishops on the board to support it. And already a move like e4 is just giving white that really nice initiative. The threat of c5 means we're not in time to get in the thematic c5 break ourselves. So it's just a really bad version here. And that's why I would probably just, play bishop e7 if they do play h3. But h3 is kind of one of these systems is a quite good practical one for avoiding black system. So it is one I could definitely recommend from white's point of view if you're looking for something to play against this system. But going to my main line, which is the 92 setup, we're going to see here why this setup, in my opinion, is not as effective here compared to the, Lapulsu Grant version that we saw earlier. So after h6, if they go bishop f4, it's just going to come to the same thing anyway. So bishop h4, g5. And yeah, knight h5, as you probably know, is our idea. We just want to trade off their bishop ASAP. And then just have a very solid position with the bishop pair, but with that bit of imbalance to play for the win. Now white's best option here is probably to just castle. And then after takes, you kind of want to take, because if you don't take soon enough, they might go bishop e5 and sort of beat you to the punch. But after takes sort of the idea you can kind of go for. And this is the approach I like to play. You can also be more solid and just play a move like knight f6 if you want to. But I kind of prefer the move of h5 and just going for this, pawn attack, like kick the knight, get this attack this way. No, they were actually quite happy if they do take on h5, as then after queen e7, we just have this ready-made attack on the h file, which is actually going to be more important than being a pawn down. Like, despite being a pawn down, I think black is actually the one who is already pressing due to the sort of veracity of this attack. The ferocity of this attack, I should say. I kind of like merge ferocity and velocity there. Um, but if white doesn't take, then yeah, if they play, say, e4 trying to hit in the center, I mean, even this position I think is still going to be okay for black, like just queen e2, long castle. From a computer point of view, yeah, white might have some small edge still, but I think it's a pretty playable situation and a quite nice worst case with a lot of imbalance in the structure and in the piece configuration. But in the model games I picked out here, both featuring our expert Santosh Latasa, white played the move of queen c2 instead. Also, we're pointing out that rook b1 is kind of an interesting engine idea that you also might like to explore from White's point of view, where you sort of delay casting to try to neutralize this h5, h4 concept is sort of the point. But instead of that, yeah, we had the move queen c2, which I think is actually a little bit of a mistake, believe it or not, where if White plays hg3 as in the Rachmanov Santosh Latasa game in Speed Chess 2023 Blitz, Black played queen e7 and decided just to go for this kind of setup. I mean, maybe I would have gone for a move like queen c7 also could be considered, or even queen f6. The reality is it doesn't matter all that much which way your queen goes, and queen 7 does have a job of neutralizing b4 ideas later on. But to be fair, you're probably not as likely to go for it in this version. Now in the actual game, black side just to simplify and just sort of take this position that, probably is just going to be quite close to equal if white trades the queens this way and just sort of fixes the weakness in place, gets a square for, for the knight potentially. Not the knight's that great on h5, but, it does fix the weakness at least. But instead, yeah, white probably didn't play it in the best version and, black just kind of had this somewhat better position just with a more flexible structure and the bishop being better than the knight. Again, not going to go through every move of the game, but one instructive moment was that after e4 takes and f takes e4, black found a very important move here as c5. This is kind of the key move to remember when they get the strong center, because you just want to split up their center and just secure those dark squares for your pieces. And once you do that, the position is just going to be much better for black. And here, white, yeah, didn't sort of find the only move of knight f4 to, to keep the disadvantage to a minimum, and as a result, he just lost without too much of a fight. So, it is worth pointing out that objectively, I do think that a move like king b8 is probably a little more flexible. That probably this sort of approach with say h5 and knight b6 is probably the one I would go for as a little bit of an improvement. Just so if g4 you have h4 and they're not fixing the pawn as a weakness like we saw in the variation with g4. So what if they play knight g3 instead? Well, now the move h5 that we saw beforehand is even more powerful. We're not even playing it as a pawn stack here. And if they do castle, then yeah, you have this very ready-made plan of like h4. And it's an interesting point. You actually don't necessarily want to rush with the move h3, because even though it gives you the forward pawn, it does also kind of allow white to implant the knight on f5, which is quite nice for white. So it's actually better to be a little bit more patient and play a move like knight b6 here. And let's say they play knight f5. Well, then you just kind of play around the knight, like queen f6, long castle, and you're not even that scared of a4. You kind of just go king b8 and a6, b6, and the attack just kind of comes to a little bit of a dead end here. Um, sorry, not knight c7 because then knight e4 is a little bit of a nasty trick, but you can play rook c8 and that's going to cover you pretty well. We'll just play to move b5 later and just completely lock down the queen side. Well, you still have a free run to go for your attack on the king side as such. A bit of a long explanation, but I think it's important to show what happens if they do castle into it. After long castles, yeah, this just ended up being a very, very nice position for black. Um, yeah, as I said before, you could also just play a move like queen c7 or queen a5 and castle along that way. But again, the difference is not the greatest, but I think I would probably prefer to choose this square. I think after queen f6, it is true that the queen does feel a little bit stuck on f6 in this position. It's not the biggest factor, but yeah, after hg3, hg3. I mean, Sasha Tasa did go on to win this game against Rodstein anyway, because he does have the bishop there, and even with white having the outpost knight, the position is still more pleasant for black to play due to the bishops. I just sort of showing quickly how he kind of outplayed his opponent, just like rook h8. Just sort of realizing that bishop pair is going to kind of, the advantage is going to kind of amplify as more pieces get traded, and after rook h5. Rook h5, quite a good move, by the way, to sort of change the tension in your favor. Rook, queen d8, a3, and for this point, the position is still pretty close to equal. But black is, just creating that little bit of pressure to work with. After knight e g3, bishop c7. All these moves are fairly standard. You just want to make sure all your pieces have the maximum mobility. And with the move like queen h3 as well, just kind of creating that pressure. That being said, I do think that queen h2 is probably more precise, just so you don't have the queen h1 resource that we see in the game. But we end up with this ending that, probably should just be equal. Like in the end, black did kind of go on to win it just by sort of exchanging some pieces and sort of letting white kind of self-destruct a little bit at the end. Like if we take the final position, we can kind of see it. Black was able to eventually open things up for the bishops and kind of like break through in this sort of way. But basically that was kind of the game I wanted to show, just to conclude. Where you can sort of see that the games of Shantosh Latasa are definitely games worth studying if you want to really master these positions. And there are also a lot of other strong GMs playing this on occasion. But in conclusion, I think that Bishop E6 is a very respectable system. Like I said, it may not be like as reliable an equalizer as some of the hardcore mainlines, but I don't think it's considerably worse than the other systems. You just get a very flexible position. Your ideas are very clear of just going h6, g5, knight, h5 to trade off their bishop and get the bishop pair advantage, to get that imbalance to play for a win. But at the same time, even if they avoid it, you still get a very respectable, normal kind of Queen's Gambit decline type of position. So it's a pretty easy system to add to your repertoire, not much theory, very clear ideas. And do let me know in the comments below, what your thoughts are on the system. If you have any questions as well about, some different possibilities, you can also ask and kind of help each other out in that way. But on that note, I will see you in the next video. So the plan I have is basically to kind of interchange, like by sort of every 2 days or so, kind of have a different system. It's like one with black, then one with white, and it's kind of just flip it around each time just to sort of keep it kind of interesting that way. But on that note, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.